Real estate is a tough business. It can be a long and complicated journey involving contractors, agents, inspectors, lenders, and appraisers. The appraiser is the valuation expert and determines value in real estate. Yet most in the industry don't know much about the appraisal process, and we want to change that.
I'm John Sledge, a retired real estate appraiser turned investor. My wife Kalen and I started this podcast to share insights into analyzing real estate through the eyes of an appraiser, and to share stories to help you avoid costly mistakes on your real estate journey. This is the Think Like an Appraiser podcast, Cautionary Tales in Real Estate.
This is episode number 24 of the Think Like an Appraiser podcast, Cautionary Tales in Real Estate. And today, John and I are going to be answering some questions that we've gotten through email. We love it when we get emails from our listeners, and these questions were just a little more in depth. The answer is a little more in depth, so we thought we'd just do a podcast with them. So our first question is from Bailey. And Bailey says, as a seller, why do I need to be concerned about the appraisal?
That's a great question.
That's a good question, yeah.
It is. And I understand why you're asking the question, because the appraisal is completed for the buyer's lender. And so the lenders, it's important to them, it's important to the buyer so that they can get their loan. Why the seller would worry about the appraisal is if the appraisal doesn't make a market value that is equal to or more than your contracted price, then it will affect the sale.
So let's go back and just explain some of those terms. Okay. So if it doesn't make value, what does that mean?
So the appraiser determines their estimated market value. So that is the value that they assign to your home based on the comparable sales in the neighborhood at the time of the appraisal. And so they are determining a value for the lender so that the lender knows that they're not loaning too much money on the home that they're using as collateral for the mortgage. And so the market value and how that can affect you is if the market value that's assigned, or what the comparable sales determine the value is, then the sales price, if the sales price is more than that market value, then one, the borrower, the buyer, can't get the loan for the amount that they want to, and therefore they're going to come back and negotiate a different sales price or a different contracted price because your home, according to the appraiser, isn't worth the amount that it's being sold for.
Right. So in the lender's mind, you're overpaying for the home.
Correct.
Or the buyer is overpaying for the home.
Right.
Right. But if you're the seller, like this question, so what can happen is your house may end up back on the market, and then that just prolongs your situation.
Right.
Because unfortunately the appraisal is done at the end of this process, which...
Right. It's typically the last thing that's done prior to closing. And if you find out that the appraisal doesn't match the sales price, then typically the buyer will pull out of the sale or try to negotiate a lower price. So then you would either have to sell your home for less than you originally contracted it for, or you'd have to take it and put it back on the market and wait through more showings and hope to get a different contract price down the road. So
let's talk for a minute about what you can do as a seller so that this does not happen.
One of the biggest obstacles that happens many times when a home would not make value, the problem was that the size of the home in the listing was different than the size of the home when I measured it. So there were many times that my measurements as an appraiser, which is what the appraisal is determined by, I found the home to be smaller than what the size that it was listed. And therefore, that's going to cause the value of the home to be lower because it's a price per square foot industry, and so all sales are priced per square foot. And so if the home is smaller than it was listed, then the value typically and many times won't match the contracted price or exceed the contracted price.
And if you've listened to our podcast before, you know this is a topic we talk about a lot. We're very passionate about accurate home size before listing your home because it is a price per square foot industry.
It is.
And so the seller, by having an accurate home size before listing, that alone will make sure that the comparable sales that are being looked at to determine a listing price are accurate ones, correct?
Exactly, because if your realtor who works for you, they're there to help you determine what an accurate list price would be. And so they're looking at comparable sales just as the appraiser would at the end. And so the most important thing is that the size of your home that the realtor's determining the price by is equal to the size of the home when the appraisal is done. So if the beginning and the end are equal, then the two professionals that are looking at either pricing in the beginning as your realtor or the market value by the appraisal, they're much more likely to be close, or at least to be equal.
All right, let's go on to the next question. The question is from Connor, and Connor asks, I've heard the term wholesaler in the real estate arena. What is a wholesaler?
All right, a wholesaler, they typically, try to buy and sell properties to investors, to people that are come in and do value add to a home and to resell it or to keep it as a rental property. What the wholesaler does is they will go out into neighborhoods and they'll find individuals who want to sell their home.
They're usually in a distressed situation.
Correct. They need to sell quickly. The home is in disrepair. A lot of times it's an estate sale where there's multiple people.
They don't want to put it on the market.
Right.
In
they
a
don't want to invest any
way.
more money into it
Right.
to fix it up, to get it ready for sale. They want to sell it quickly at the best price they can get so that they can either pay off a mortgage that they need to get out of or settle an estate, or they just have a property that really needs a lot of repairs and they're not in a position to do that. Then the wholesaler will come in and contract that property, and then they will turn around and find a buyer. So a lot of the times, typically a wholesale property will change from the existing owner to the investor, and the wholesaler facilitates the deal. So they actually will contract it, and then they'll write a contract with a buyer. But typically it doesn't close. Sometimes it does, but typically it goes from the seller to the buyer, and the wholesaler is more brokers the deal.
Right, kind of like a middleman.
A middleman. So they're finding a buyer for the person who needs to get out, and they're finding homes for these investors who are looking for a property that needs renovating.
So when a wholesaler is involved, it is very important that you do your own due diligence and make sure that you have a good handle of what the ARV on this home is going to be based on the scope of work that you're going to be doing. Don't just take general terms and think that, yes, you could make this deal work.
No, exactly, because that's a lot of the times, the wholesalers, they'll come up to market the property, and they'll come up with an ARV, which is the after repaired value. So this would be the price that the investor could sell the property for or refinance it if they're going to keep it as a rental property. So they'll come up with an ARV based on renovated homes in the neighborhood, and they'll come up with a estimated cost of repairs. But to accurately determine the ARV as the appraiser would, you have to determine a scope of work first. And so you, as the investor or the buyer, you're right. They must do their own due diligence. They must determine what work needs to be done based on the comparable sales in the neighborhood. And then, based on that scope of work, they can determine what the ARV is. So then they can look at it based on their purchase price and their cost to repair. Is this a good deal? Am I going to be able to make money on the back end when I sell this property?
Because I think it's important to remember that the wholesaler doesn't want to end up with that property.
Correct.
The wholesaler is a salesperson, and they're trying to sell the property.
Right.
So if you don't do your own research, you might find yourself in a situation where you've been given inaccurate information. Just like in any profession, there are honest people out there and there are dishonest people out there. So just make sure you do your research.
Exactly. I mean, and we talk about that every time, is do your own due diligence. Make sure that you know what it is you're buying and what you have to do to the property so you can be profitable and put more profit in your pocket at the end of the deal.
Okay, our next question is from Steve, and he asks, or he says, I've been told that you make money on the buy. What does that mean in real estate?
All right, so making money on the buy. What that means is if you buy the property right, so if you buy it cheap, you find it at the lowest price that you can buy, then that means that you will make money when you sell that home. And so they're talking about in value add properties. So if you get a great deal on the front end on your buy, then you are guaranteed to make money.
Well, because you have more room for error.
Exactly.
But what we want you to understand is if you plan carefully, you can make more money through better planning.
Correct.
Then, why lose money because you've made mistakes?
Right, exactly. So making money on the buy, there's nothing wrong with getting the best deal that you can get out there. Yes, you should go and you should not overpay for a property, but you really must do your due diligence and go through and determine exactly what you need to do and make a plan so that you're able to make money all the way through the project. You're making money on the buy, you're making money on your renovations, and you're making money because you renovated that property to compete with the higher end homes in the neighborhood. So you're getting the best sales price as well. So the best way to do it is to make money by making a plan from start to finish so that you're able to make the most amount of money, not just focused on the buy, but focus on your details and your plan for your project before you ever move forward.
Okay, our next question is from Rebecca. And Rebecca wants to know, what is the most common mistake you saw investors make?
No, that's a great question. I would say the most common mistake that investors make is not making a detailed plan. When they go in and they find a property, they need to go and look at the comparable sales to determine what renovations need to be completed. And then from that list of renovations that need to be completed, you're making a detailed plan and scope of work. And so by making the plan of all the things that you need to get accomplished, then finding out and determining what your ARV is, then you've got a plan on how this project's going to go from start to finish. You also, as an investor, should have contingency funds built into your budget to ensure that when you come across a problem, that you're able to handle that problem and move forward and complete the scope of work. Because that's one of the problems with not having a good plan is when you run into a problem and you have to deal with that, then you run short of funds. And so then you're making cuts and you're cutting corners and you're not completing the scope of work that you lined out when you began the project. And so how that could affect you is, one, the sales price that you receive might not be as high as you expected. Or if you're refinancing it, the market value might come in below because you didn't complete the scope of work that needed to be completed. So it's all about planning and executing your plan.
And having an accurate scope of work.
Exactly.
Accurate and detailed. Okay, our last question for the day is from Donna, and she says, I listen to your podcast regularly, and you talk about the importance of an accurate listing size. Seems like no one is protecting the seller. How can we change that?
Well, that's a great question.
It goes back to our first question.
It really does. And the appraiser, the first thing they do, and we've mentioned this many times, is measure the home. They're going to go out and they're going to determine, based on the ANSI measurement standards, what the size of this home is to determine their market value. So the industry norm is that the size for the listing is taken from either public records or a previous listing. And the biggest problem is because your realtor, your listing agent, is out there to protect you. But the industry norm, and I think it comes with as we have become a more information-based society and things are so accessible to us, when people find information online, whether it be the square footage of a home on county records or in a previous MLS, they just assume that this was verified.
Right.
And that's not the case. So we suggest and we recommend that every home be measured before listing, because you want the listing size to equal the size the appraiser is going to come up with, because that can avoid so many problems. And it really comes from a lack of understanding that the numbers that are in county records were never planned on being a size to use for selling a home. It's part of the assessment process, and it's not out there to utilize for any other purpose.
All right. Well, thank you to Bailey and Connor and Steve and Rebecca and Donna for these great email questions. And we love getting emails with questions, and we are happy to answer general questions like this. Now, if you have specific appraisal questions about something that you're working on, we do have a program called the Retired Appraiser on Retainer, where you can actually have conversations with John on your specific project. Unfortunately, that is closed right now because we have too many students, but you can send us an email wanting to join the wait list, and as soon as we are accepting new students, we'll let you know.
Sounds great.
Well, congratulations. You made it to the end of our podcast. Did you know that only 5% of podcast listeners make it to the end of an episode? When I found that statistic out, I was really surprised. But it shows you have a high level of commitment, and we need people like you spreading our message, which is the key to success in real estate is through research and due diligence. And that's what our podcast is about. Sharing stories about mistakes made is part of a research process.
It is. So we need your help. We couldn't do this without you. We need you to like and share our podcast, and make sure you subscribe because you don't want to miss an episode. Also, if you'd rate the podcast, that lets other people know how much value you're getting from our show.
And because you're helping us, we promise to continue to provide quality content for our listeners. We want to help you continue to grow your real estate business. And right now on our website, thinklikeanappraiser.com, you can find 75 due diligence questions to ask. It's a free download. So get your copy today at thinklikeanappraiser.com.